Japan in the 1990s, Part 2 out of 10. And if Part 1 was the end of the party, consider this the morning after. As Japan's economy continued its slow, painful deflation, 1991 also threw in a slew of natural disasters for good measure. Because apparently, one crisis at a time just wasn't enough. Besides forces of nature taking their toll, it was the year one of the country's greatest post-war icons passed away. But it was also a year where, despite everything, Japan quietly changed the world not once but twice with 2 inventions and discoveries whose impact we can still feel every single day. It was the year the foundation for Japan's mobile communications revolution was laid, the year Tokyo got its sleaziest and most iconic nightclub, the year a giant Hawaiian started to nearly break sumo's ultimate glass ceiling, the year Sega flopped the only way they know how, in spectacular fashion, and so much more. My name is Aniki, and you're watching Timeline Japan 1990s. Before we get started, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe. Who am I kidding? You know how it works. After all, Aniki viewers are scientifically proven to be extraordinarily intelligent and good looking too. If on top of all of that, you're also incredibly generous, then consider supporting me on Patreon as well, where starting at just $1 per month, you can get Timeline Japan and all my other content ad-free. Pretty good deal, I think.
わかりました。契約書を作りましょう。
But that being said, it's time for some 1991. Ikimashou! Let's do this.
え？何？
We kick off year 2 of the Japanese 1990s with the very first day of it. As the clock struck midnight on January 1st, 1991, every single phone number in Tokyo underwent a small but surprisingly significant change, jumping from 9 digits to, brace yourself here, 10 digits. The horror! But in all seriousness, doesn't sound like much, does it? Up until New Year's Eve 1990, Tokyo numbers looked like this. 03 followed by a unique 7-digit combination. The change, that lone 3 was now joined by another 3, making it 033 and so on. Just one extra digit, not a big deal. Just dial that one additional 3 when nervously calling your Tokyo crush and hoping their dad doesn't pick up. But things looked a bit different when you happen to have printed, painted, or plastered a Tokyo phone number on literally anything, which, as it turned out, a lot of people had. Ad boards, shop signs, business cards, printed materials of every imaginable kind, all of it became kind of incorrect overnight. For anyone who knew about the extra 3, it was a minor inconvenience, but companies weren't about to gamble on whether their customers would figure it out, so advertisement across Tokyo had to be updated en masse, with television spots actively airing to explain the change. Not the end of the world, but absolutely a headache, which was particularly unwelcome on top of whatever the New Year's celebrations had already done to people's heads the night before.
Bye bye.
おやすみ。
おやすみ。
Game of the Year.
On March 19th, a much more legitimate headache was finally put to rest with the launch of the Narita Express. Nicknamed the Nex, this is far more than just another train line in the most train-obsessed country on Earth. Sharper minds among you may have already clocked the name Narita Express, as in a train designed to connect Narita Airport directly with the rest of Tokyo. Because before March 19th, 1991, making the journey from Narita into the city center was frankly a bit of an ordeal.
It seems impossible to get to on time. Oh, you mean Narita, right?
I'm so tired of getting caught in that traffic from Shinjuku.
Yeah, I'm sick of it.
At some point along the journey, you actually had to get on a bus. And I don't need to tell you how we feel about buses now, do I? From this day forward, however, the bus into Tokyo was reserved strictly for the masochists. Because everyone else, tourists, business travelers, weary, jet-lagged souls of all kinds, could now make the roughly 1-hour trip into central Tokyo in considerably more comfort and style. And the next didn't stop there. It also connected the airport with nearby Yokohama, making it an indispensable link for anyone landing at Narita rather than Haneda. Just when you think Japan had built every piece of infrastructure it could possibly ever need, they find yet another perfectly legitimate excuse to build more trains. Honestly, good for them. Then on April 1st, the Tokyo Metropolitan government found itself a pretty good excuse of its own. Specifically, an excuse to move into the most unhinged government building in the world at the time. On that day, the leadership of Japan's capital packed its bags and relocated from its old digs into this thing, the Tokyo-to Chōsha, known affectionately as the Tojo. And this building is spectacular in every sense of the word. Designed by the legendary Tange Kenzo and constructed between April of 1988 and December of 1990, it stands 48 stories and 243 meters or 797 feet tall, holding the record for the tallest building in Tokyo by roof height until the Midtown Tower came along in 2007. The Tojo remains, however, to this day as the tallest city hall on the entire planet, with a design that, by the way, was meant to be what you'd get if a Gothic cathedral and an integrated circuit somehow had a very ambitious child. I can see the vision. As for the price tag, a cool 157 billion yen, or roughly $1 billion of good old-fashioned taxpayer money. But to be fair to the government, the move was a long time coming. The old city hall in Marunouchi had been described since the 1970s as, and I quote, dilapidated, dispersed, and cramped, making it undesirable in terms of providing services to the citizens and improving the efficiency of staff. And so, in April of 1991, the people keeping Tokyo's wheels turning packed up from Chiyoda Ward and relocated to Shinjuku. Just a couple of stones throws away from Kabukicho. Which, look, I'm not trying to imply anything here, but even a government worker needs to unwind every once in a while. Futuristic, record-breaking, and eye-wateringly expensive, the new Tokyo Metropolitan Government Building was proof that even a bubble hangover couldn't stop Japan from finishing the insane architectural projects it had started. Also in April, Japan took a massive leap towards its mobile future with the release of the first couple of MOVA phones under communications giant NTT. Now, what in God's name is a MOVA? It's actually a little bit confusing at first, so here's the simple version. MOVA was simultaneously a mobile communications service and a brand of ultra-compact, ultra-pocketable mobile phones. And that April 1991 launch came with not one, but 4 devices, each designed and manufactured by a different Japanese electronics giant. You had the MOVA P by Panasonic, apparently the most popular of the bunch, the MOVA N by NEC, which has a legitimate claim to being the world's first ever flip phone, and the MOVA D and the MOVA F by Mitsubishi and Fujitsu respectively. A proper boy band of mobile phones, if you will. Unimpressive by today's standards? Sure. Revolutionary for 1991? Absolutely. And get this, here's the best part. These phones were essentially a revenge project. Just 2 years earlier, American company Motorola dared to drop the MicroTAC, a for the time impossibly slim pocketable device that landed at a time when Japan's most cutting-edge mobile offering looked something like this. Yeah, the Japanese felt a bit embarrassed, because after all, they were supposed to be the ones making the most amazing consumer electronics. NTT agreed, and basically told those aforementioned manufacturers to get the heck out of here and not come back until they could beat Motorola. And what they came back with were 4 of the smallest mobile phones the world had ever seen. And the Japanese public responded enthusiastically, to put it mildly. NTT's mobile phone sales more than doubled in the 1991 fiscal year compared to the year prior, with over 500,000 handsets sold, despite the sputtering economy and despite the fact that running one of these things was anything but cheap. The monthly fee alone came in at 17,000 yen, or roughly $126. Now that tells you everything you need to know about just how badly the Japanese wanted to get connected on the go. And as for NTT, they had struck a gold mine. Riding the wave of MOVA's success, they incorporated NTT Mobile Communications just a few months later as a new subsidiary that would be rebranded the following year as NTT Docomo. Today, Docomo is of course Japan's largest wireless carrier with over 91 million subscribers. In a way, it all started with these 4 small phones, brilliantly advertised by Bruce Willis. Gotta love the early 90s.
コマーシャルタイムです。
肉体疲労時の栄養補給にリポビタン D わしのマークの大正製薬です。
The following month then came in with a double whammy on May 15th. First up, something that the regular Aniki viewer is probably sick of hearing about at this point: the Act on Prevention of Unjust Acts by members of organized crime groups, which, as the name rather plainly suggests, introduced serious countermeasures against our quote-unquote favorite tattooed, pinky-deficient gangsters, the Yakuza. Passed on this day and coming into effect in March of the following year, this anti-organized crime law arrived on the back of a very turbulent few years for the Japanese criminal underworld. By 1991, the Yakuza were numerous, wealthy, and extraordinarily well-connected. From humble street stalls to Japan's biggest corporations, the major crime syndicates had their fingers, yes, all 9 of them, in virtually every corner of Japanese business. And yet, for a long time, that alone wasn't enough for the Japanese government to act. For a long time, the government's approach had been one of cautious tolerance. As long as the Yakuza kept things among themselves, the authorities largely looked the other way. But a string of violent gang conflicts throughout the 1980s that spilled into civilian life, that was the final straw. The Yakuza, much like the Japanese economy, had grown too big and too bold for its own good. These new laws did something that sounds almost embarrassingly obvious in hindsight. It gave law enforcement the framework to formally designate specific organizations as crime groups, something that unbelievably was never properly codified before. 24 groups were designated when the law came into force, including the Yamaguchi-gumi and the Inagawa-kai, and a long list of behaviors was now explicitly banned too. Protection money, illegal debt collection, intimidating real estate deals, and much more. Bosses were also made personally liable for their members' actions, piercing the organizational shield they'd hidden behind for decades. The twist, rather than dismantling the Yakuza, the law initially pushed them underground instead, forcing crime groups to infiltrate legitimate businesses and become even harder to detect. Less visible, arguably even more dangerous. Oh, and the Yakuza actually staged protest marches against this law, arguing that it violated their constitutional right to freedom of association. You've got to respect the audacity, just a little. The very same day, while Japanese law enforcement was busy spitting in the face of organized crime, one of Tokyo's most legendary nightclubs ever threw open its doors and cranked up the volume. That night, Juliana's Tokyo began operation in the Shibaura district, already one of the hottest nightlife destinations in the capital, home to established venues like the legendary Shibaura Gold. And Juliana's Tokyo didn't just join the party, it became the party. Officially called Juliana's Tokyo British Discotheque in Shibaura and launched as a collaboration between Japanese trading company Nissho Iwai and British leisure company Juliana's, the club's original concept was almost wholesome. Give ordinary office ladies who couldn't get into the more exclusive Shibaura clubs a place where they could decompress after a long day of work. And decompress they did. Juliana's most iconic feature were its 130cm high elevated platforms on either side of the dance floor, where women, both professional dancers and guests, wearing skin-tight bodycon dresses and brandishing Juliana's issue fans could be, let's say, carefully observed by the men standing below. That image became instantly iconic and instantly controversial. Some in the media were appalled by the whole setup, not entirely without reason, but many of the women themselves saw it differently, describing Juliana's as a rare space to shed the rigid mask of professional life and just, become someone else entirely for a few hours. And hey, the club was also quietly influential in Japan's music scene, introducing techno, then still relatively new to Japanese ears in the early 90s, to a massive audience, partly through a series of official Juliana's Tokyo CD compilations. The venue itself officially held 2,000 people, but at its peak, regularly packed in 3,000 or more, with hundreds more queuing outside hoping to get in. In short, Juliana's Tokyo burned bright and briefly. The economy eventually took its toll. That, coupled with a few bad business decisions, meant that on August 31st, 1994, the club shut down for good. 4,000 people showed up that day for one final night, with a rumored 10,000 more outside who didn't make it in. It had lasted just over 3 years, but those 3 years produced images so vivid and so alive that they now feel almost surreal against the backdrop of post-bubble Japan. The party was short, intense, and utterly unforgettable. Rest in peace, Juliana's Tokyo. June of 1991 then turned out to be one of the most quietly momentous months in the history of Japanese tech. First, Sony released its CCD TR1 8mm camcorder. And while that might not sound like headline news, what was inside that camcorder absolutely was. Because the CCD TR1 was the first commercial product in history to feature a rechargeable lithium-ion battery. I want to be upfront about something here. I'm not trying to include Sony in almost every single Timeline Japan episode, but what do you do when one company goes this relentlessly hard for an entire decade? Because the commercialization of the lithium-ion battery might genuinely be the most quietly influential thing Sony ever did. Now, to be fair, Sony didn't conjure this thing out of thin air or anything. The foundation was laid by others. M. Stanley Whittingham first developed a rechargeable lithium battery back in the 1970s, and in the 1980s, John Goodenough, a man with a last name that is almost aggressively perfect for the context, then expanded significantly on that work. Goodenough's research was in fact good enough to catch the attention of both Sony and Japanese chemicals giant Asahi Kasei, who teamed up to finally bring the technology to the mass market. June 1991 was the moment it all clicked into place, and from that point on, consumer electronics were never the same. Think about every device you own that needs charging. Your phone, your laptop, your tablet, your wireless headphones, your electric car if you're fancy. All of it running on some type of lithium-ion battery. An invention that is not only still the global standard more than 3 decades later, but one that has quietly become one of the most indispensable technologies in modern human life. Not bad for a 1991 camcorder release, huh? But June of 1991 wasn't done yet, because that same month, a researcher at NEC's Fundamental Research Laboratories in Tsukuba, Japan, peered through an electron microscope and saw something that nobody had properly documented before. Something that would eventually change materials science forever. That researcher's name was Ichima Sumio. He'd been working at NEC since 1987, and in June of 1991, while going about his regular work, he spotted something strange under the microscope. Tiny, tube-shaped structures made entirely of carbon, each one thousands of times thinner than a single human hair. Carbon nanotubes. And while that might sound like something you'd hear in a science class and immediately forget, just bear with me here, because this one actually matters. What are these things actually good for? Well, despite being almost impossibly small, these little tubes are incredibly strong. Stronger than steel, in fact, and at a fraction of the weight. They also conduct electricity and heat really well, which makes them useful in all kinds of ways. Stronger and lighter materials for things like aircraft and sports equipment, better electronics, advances in medicine, and even improvements in battery technology. And hey, the applications are actually still being discovered to this day. Ichima published his findings in the journal Nature on November 7th of the same year. Just like that, the scientific world had a new obsession. One quiet morning at a microscope in Tsukuba, and the ripple effects are still being felt more than 30 years later. Crazy stuff. June, however, also brought the first major natural disaster in Japan of 1991. When on the 3rd, Mount Unzen in Nagasaki Prefecture erupted. The volcano had been showing signs of unrest since November of 1990, prompting authorities to evacuate around 12,000 nearby residents in the months that followed. But the eruption on June 3rd still proved devastating. A pyroclastic flow extended 4.5 kilometers or nearly 3 miles from the crater and tragically claimed the lives of 43 people, most of them journalists and scientists who had positioned themselves close to the mountain to document the event. The human cost, combined with the widespread property damage, made the so-called Heisei Eruption of Mount Unzen the worst volcanic disaster in Japan's post-war history at the time. The volcano wouldn't fully settle down until 1995, ending its most active period in nearly 200 years. The previous episode of volcanic activity having been the catastrophic 1792 eruption, which triggered a massive landslide and a resulting tsunami that killed an estimated 15,000 people. By that grim measure, 1991 could have been far worse. But 43 lives lost, many of them people who had gone to bear witness to history, is a tragedy by any standards. Then, on August 5th, Japan lost one of the towering figures of its post-war automotive history when Honda Sōichirō passed away at the age of 84. And the legacy this man left behind is almost impossible to overstate. Sōichirō had been obsessed with engines from boyhood, though his first instinct wasn't to build them, it was to race them. At 29, he competed in one of the very first races held at Japan's first proper racing circuit, the Tamagawa Speedway, behind the wheel of a modified Ford he called Hamamatsu. He never finished the race. He crashed heavily and sustained injuries severe enough to end his racing career before it had really begun. Which is a sad story in and of itself, but for a man like Honda Sōichirō, stepping away from fast machines entirely was simply not an option. And so he told himself, hey, if I can't race them, I'll build them. In 1946, he founded the Honda Motor Company, and over the following decades turned it into one of the most respected motor vehicle manufacturers on the planet, both on 4 wheels and 2. Today, Honda is not just Japan's second largest car maker after the mighty Toyota, it is also the single largest manufacturer of motorcycles in the entire world. Basically, if it carries his family name, you can safely assume the people who built it know exactly what they are doing. But Honda Sōichirō's impact went far beyond the factory floor. He also oversaw the construction of the legendary Suzuka circuit, a Formula 1 staple almost every year since 1987. And as an engine manufacturer, Honda ranks among the most successful in F1 history with 6 Constructors' Championships and over 80 Grand Prix victories to their name. And of course, just 1 year prior to his passing, his company had given the world the NSX, a fitting final chapter in a story that began with a young man crashing a Ford called Hamamatsu on a Tokyo racetrack. Honda Sōichirō went from nearly being forced out of racing forever to building one of the greatest automotive and motorsport legacies the world has ever seen. A legend in every sense of the word.
コマーシャルタイムです。
冷蔵庫はパッパッパーシャル解凍でラクチャチャチャ氷と味で美味しくなくちゃ美味しくなくチャチャチャ氷も自動で水はうまいチャチャ花も上下に動かなくチャチャチャチャフリーザーを冷蔵室もドーンと広げよう
What better way to celebrate the height of summer than with a week of world-class athletics? On August 23rd, Tokyo's Olympic Stadium opened its doors for the 3rd World Championships in athletics, welcoming 1,517 competitors from 167 nations to compete across the sport's most iconic disciplines. And what a week it turned out to be. 3 world records fell in Tokyo that week. The US 4x 100-meter relay team blazed to a stunning 37.5 seconds, and a certain Carl Lewis ran a 100 meters in just 9.86 seconds. World record. But the defining moment of the entire championship came in the men's long jump final. And honestly, it might be one of the greatest individual sporting moments of the entire decade. Lewis, who hadn't lost a long jump competition in like a decade, came in on a streak of 65 consecutive wins, delivered a massive leap of 8.91 meters. The only reason it wasn't a world record? Wind assistance. Those darn elements. But then something extraordinary happened. Lewis' longtime rival Mike Powell stepped up and launched himself 8.95 meters, with no wind assistance whatsoever. Just like that, Carl Lewis's decade-long unbeaten streak was over, and Mike Powell had set a world record in a long jump that, more than 35 years later, has still never been broken. For 1 week, Japan's eastern capital became the center of the athletics universe, and history was made in the most beautiful setting imaginable. A week after the championships wrapped up, one of the most important acts in Japanese pop history made their debut. In the middle of a freaking typhoon. On September 9th, 6-piece boy band SMAP took the stage at Seibu Yuenchi Amusement Park near Tokyo to perform their debut single Can't Stop Loving on the day of its release. It would have been a memorable moment in Japanese music history under any circumstances, but fate had yet another trick up its sleeve. Typhoon number 15, nicknamed Ivy, was making its way past eastern Japan that very day, absolutely drenching the venue, the performers, and everyone in attendance. Sound equipment cut out, the rain was relentless. Nobody cared. SMAP played on, and their fans screamed right through the downpour. Because what's a little typhoon when you're witnessing greatness? The debut single landed at number 2 on the Oricon charts, a slightly underwhelming start all things considered for what was supposed to be Japan's next big thing, but Masahiro Nakai, Takuya Kimura, Goro Inagaki, Tsuyoshi Kusanagi, Shingo Katori, and Katsuyuki Mori were not easily deterred. By 1994, they had their first #1 single, and from there, the trajectory was near vertical. 55 singles released over their career, every single one of them a top 10 hit, 33 number ones, 38.5 million records sold, their own massive weekly variety show, the best-selling single in Japan of the entire 21st century. I think you get it. Until their disbandment in 2016, SMAP were absolutely inescapable. If you're talking 90s and 2000s Japanese pop culture, ain't no way you're not gonna be talking some SMAP. And it all started with 6 drenched teenagers performing in an amusement park in a typhoon in 1991. Oh, and SMAP, by the way, stands for Sports Music Assemble People, which, I mean, yeah, sure, why not? But while one typhoon marked the beginning of something wonderful, another one brought nothing but destruction. On September 27th, Typhoon Mireille, the 19th named storm of the season, made landfall near Sasebo City in Nagasaki Prefecture, packing winds of 175 kilometers per hour. It was the most powerful storm to strike Japan since 1961, and the damage it left behind was staggering. Mireille was ferocious in its reach. 41 of Japan's 47 prefectures sustained damage, over 7 million people lost power, and more than 670,000 homes were damaged or destroyed. Worst of all, between 62 and 68 people lost their lives, with over 1,000 more injured. By the time the storm crossed Hokkaido and left Japanese territory the following day, the financial toll had reached $10 billion, or roughly 22 billion in today's money, making Mireille one of the costliest disasters in Japanese history at the time. Agriculture alone took a $3 billion hit, with the apple industry bearing the brunt. Mireille knocked some 345,000 tons of apples off trees just days before harvest, earning the storm the nickname Ringo Taifu, or the Apple Typhoon.
だっ聞こえしねえよ。なんだあいつ、サーフィンな感じいたのか。もう誰も振り向かないけれど、二人にとっては大切な宝物だった。
On November 10th, the final Grand Sumo tournament of 1991 got underway in Fukuoka, and with it, the beginning of one of the sport's greatest almost stories. The annual Kyushu Basho, held on Japan's southernmost main island, closed out what had already been one of the most eventful years in sumo history. Back in May, the legendary Chiyo no Fuji, one of the greatest rikishi to ever set foot on the dohyo, had announced his retirement after losing to an 18-year-old Takanohana in a match that half of Japan tuned in to watch. It was a passing of the torch moment, and throughout 1991, a new generation of talented wrestlers was jostling to fill the enormous void left behind. But arguably, the most interesting of them all was this guy. Meet Konishiki, 184 centimeters tall, 287 kilograms, that's 633 pounds heavy, quite literally the biggest thing sumo had ever seen at the time. And he wasn't just big, he was talented, focused, and absolutely locked in. He entered that November Kyushu Basho and won the whole thing, his second career tournament title, and it quickly became clear that a push for Yokozuna, sumo's highest rank, was coming. You see, that November 1991 win was supposed to be the start of something historic. Konishiki won again in Osaka in March of 1992, posting a record of 75 wins and 15 losses across his last 6 tournaments. By any reasonable measure, the promotion should have been his, but for some reason the Japan Sumo Association disagreed. The response was essentially, let's wait one more tournament, and then all hell broke loose. Their refusal to promote the Hawaiian-born Konishiki sparked a firestorm of controversy, with allegations of racial discrimination casting a long, dark shadow over the sport as a whole, and unfortunately, over Konishiki's own career. The controversy took its toll. He finished the following tournament at 9-6, and was never quite the same force ever again. The promotion never came. Konishiki remains one of the sport's greatest what-if stories, a man who had the size, the talent, and the record, but somehow never got the recognition he deserved. A what-if story that began and arguably peaked in Fukuoka in 1991. And for our final story of the year, another what-if. This time courtesy of Sega. On December 12th, they unleashed the Mega CD onto the Japanese market. And the crowd goes mild? Known in North America as the Sega CD, this was an add-on peripheral to the wildly popular Mega Drive/Genesis that allowed players to run games from shiny discs rather than cartridges. The concept wasn't new. NEC had already beaten everyone to the punch back in 1988 with a CD add-on for the PC Engine. Nintendo, meanwhile, had been quietly developing their own disk drive for the Super Famicom around the same time. A project that never quite saw the light of day. Well, kind of, but more on that in 1994. For now, December of 1991 belonged to Sega. And look, it wasn't quite the disaster it's sometimes made out to be. The Mega CD launched at 50,000 yen, sold reasonably well in Japan initially, and the hardware was generally kind of impressive for the time. Full motion video, CD quality audio, the promise of a new era of gaming. Except, the Mega Drive was never as popular in Japan as it was overseas. Once the novelty wore off, sales fell quickly. The North American launch the following year didn't move the needle that much either, and by 1995, Sega had completely abandoned the thing. Just 2.2 million units sold worldwide, and a library of games that ranged from the genuinely brilliant Sonic CD, Snatcher, Lunar, Road Adventure, to the gloriously terrible. I mean, what in the heck is a sewer shark? But here's the thing about Sega. Nobody fails quite like they do, and it could have been much worse. I mean, just imagine if they made an ugly, mushroom-shaped 32-bit add-on for the Mega Drive that... oh yeah, that thing. And there you have it, 1991 in the books. What else do the Japanese 1990s have in store? Well, a whole lot more, believe me, and we're gonna find out very soon. Until then, let me just shout out these amazing people appearing on your screens right now who make all of this time-traveling stuff possible in the first place. Including the Hockey Gentleman, Saxonfuchs, D-Fox, Saikajo, Khalid Lepta, Xo Wiabu, Tricoat, Kevin Hickson, Buns, Journeyman351, Michael Smith, RK0, Hajime no James, Utku Hussein Kaya, Steve Matsui, Hypanen, Javier Soravia, Midnight Channel, Turam, Maruinu, CJ and Mary, Cats and Soup, Chart B-Man, Ben Harradine, White Gilden, Sierra DC, T-Bird, Metal Mama, Ubu Cakes, Ian Farmer, Chris Wallace, JR Horse, Adeye Akono, Guillaume Clement y Garcia, and Ilya Kuznirovic. A big thank you to all of you and everyone else who tuned in for 1991. I guess I'll see you next year. じゃあ、またね。
Aren't you about ready to go home now?